Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for making the time to join us for this webinar today. I'm sure, as most of you will agree, we are living in times that are very tough economic-wise, and we are seeing, more job opportunities in the formal sector shrinking further and further, and more so now, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions that we've been seeing around the globe for the last couple of months. Now, the conversation around the rise of the gig economy and how it plays a key role in opening up more informal job opportunities, especially for the youth, could not really be better timed. With the support of MasterCard Foundation, MSC and BFA worked with Lynk, and Lynk is a gig platform for informal workers to provide digital financial services to improve the working conditions of the gig workers. In today's webinar, MSC and BFA will share how they assisted gig workers in accessing microinsurance and credit respectively. Before we do that, first allow us to play a short video and a welcome message from MasterCard Foundation, who made these projects possible. Edward, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tina Nasul, and I'm Program Partner at MasterCard Foundation. I'm delighted that you're attending today's webinar. I'm confident that you will gain valuable insights into the important work that is being done to support young people in the informal sector in Africa. MasterCard Foundation seeks a world where everyone has the opportunity to learn and prosper. We work with partner organizations like MicroSafe to ensure that millions of young people, especially young women, access quality education, financial services, and dignified work. Young Africa works with MasterCard Foundation's strategy to enable 30 million young people, particularly young women across Africa, to access dignified work by 2030. Within this strategy, our partnership with MicroSafe supported the development of microinsurance products for young professionals. Our partnership also enabled young people to be connected with gig work opportunities. The research that you will hear about today confirms the business case for developing microinsurance products for informal workers. These workers are not served by traditional formal forms of insurance, which makes them extremely vulnerable, particularly now. With the world facing the COVID-19 pandemic, we need innovative solutions, such as digital microinsurance to mitigate risk in an unpredictable future. Innovation will help. It'll help build the resilience of informal workers, gig work platforms, and insurance companies. I trust that you will find this webinar informative. My hope is that it will challenge you to consider other innovative digital solutions. Together, we can accelerate young people's access to dignified work in Africa.
Thank you for that. So do allow me to introduce our first presenter for the day, Anne Gashoka, who is a qualitative researcher with BFA Global. Anne will walk us through the first part of this webinar, and she will focus on Loan for Two programs to increase pros income. Before I give Anne the platform, we have on our webinar a question panel down there. If you see it, please feel free to drop in your questions as the panelists are taking us through the presentations. We'll try as much as possible to answer the bulk of them as the presentation is going on, and the rest that will remain will be sorted out in the Q&A session. Also, feel free, if you're experiencing any issue, maybe hearing the presenter, drop a similar query on the chat box, and we'll get back to you. Thank you, Anne. Welcome on board.
Thank you, Doreen. Good afternoon, good morning. I'm going to take you through one of the programs that we worked closely with Lynk. So Loan for Two, it was a nano project under Fiber. Fiber was a 4-year partnership between BFA Global and MasterCard Foundation. MasterCard Foundation was a great partner for us in exploring financial inclusion for digital platforms, especially with Lynk. So as Doreen has mentioned, Lynk is a platform that connects vetted informal workers to clients. Next slide, please. So before we actually tested out our program with Lynk, we had initially 3 hypotheses, and our 3 hypotheses from BFA was understanding more about TVET. So TVET is technical and vocational education training We wanted to know if it has potential for high return for both its students and to the Kenyan economy. So the three hypotheses that we wanted to test out, one of it was, do graduates, and by graduates we mean people who complete primary school or high school, do they need more financing in order for them to be able to join this TVET institution? The other hypothesis was like, what are some of the barriers that make some of these students face it difficult in accessing gainful employment? Then the third one, we wanted to understand the gap in the Kenyan vocational education training. We wanted to know if indeed it had some gaps whereby most students were not able to join TVET. So after we did our exploration, these are some of the initial findings that we came about. So we found out that actually students who go through TVET, they did not have a problem in terms of financing their education. The TVET sector was actually overfunded because Even Help, one of the Kenya organizations which provide high education loans, have a package that they really, finance people who want to go through TVET education. And when we had some of our earlier engagements with the Help, they actually told us most people don't even go for those loans. Then there were scholarships, and there were well-wishers who were funding these TVET institutions. So we found out that that was not an issue. So the main issue that came out to play was that the graduates needed more sector-specific tools, stroke equipment, to enable them to be able to go through their education very well. And also these tools were very vital in preparing them to fill an expanding workforce. Also, in these TVET schools, we found out that some of these equipments were inadequate. So, for example, you'll find those people who are doing a mechanical engineering course, they'll only have a very old model of a car that they were being trained on, which when they graduated from TVET and they went outside there looking for jobs, they were not properly equipped because they had been working with, like, let's say, for example, an old model of a car. So that made some of them to access low-paying or unpaid apprenticeship so that they can be able to sharpen their skills further. So with that in mind, we thought how else would we be able to make an impact to some of these students who are skill-based. So they mentioned a bit of challenges. One of it being the equipment that they were lacking. Then it was like, even for those who had equipment, they did not have the startup capital, which it needed them to have a large amount of money. Then also the other challenge was the limited institution where they could go and even try to borrow maybe capital to start up their business because they did not have a credit history. Most of the formal financial institutions require them to have that. So along the way, we were able to partner with Lynk because Lynk were already working with this kind of people that we were interviewing. So I'll take you the loan design and the methodology part with Lynk. So I think our biggest question when we started the negotiation with Lynk was to understand if indeed small loans can increase productivity, stroke income for the Lynk workers who would be eligible for our loans. So our methodology was as follows. So we did qualitative interviews, both qualitative and one, for the baseline with the pros. So the pros, these are the workers who work on the Lynk platform. They refer to them as pros. So we carried out a number of qualitative interviews, just understanding what type of tools would they require. We also ran an M survey through SMS-based, whereby we also wanted them to be able to tell us what type of equipment or tools would enable them to increase their productivity and maybe eventually increase their income. So we coordinated together with Lynk. We were able to develop a loan product. Then we rolled out the loan product to the first cohort. And then periodically, we were able to monitor and assess the performance of the loan. So our engagement with Lynk ended in June, but still the loan is ongoing. So I'll take you straight to the loan eligibility criteria. criteria. So for us to be able to make sure that we were getting the right people who these tools were going to help, we went through the last 3 months of the labor earnings from the Lynk database. And that one was to enable us to see how much each of the pro who would be eligible, how much ticket size of loan would they get. So the ticket size was between 100 USD to 300. And in between there, we were able to come up with a concept of a loan boost of $50 to add on to their income when we were calculating about the eligibility. So for this particular pilot, each pro was required only to have one loan as we progressed. So we had two different types of loans. So this is just a snapshot of the loan tracker. So the first loan we had was unrestricted loan. Unrestricted loan meant that even if they were not going to buy the actual tool and equipment, they would use the loan for income sourcing purposes. And this is because also Lynk has different categories for their pros. It doesn't mean that everyone who is in their platform required a tool or equipment. So we did not also want to eliminate those ones that they did not require tools. So for the unrestricted loan, we have it as group 1 and group 2, because for group 1, those were the first ones that we gave the money to, and then along the way we gave the second group. The other type of loan that we have is starter pack. So starter pack is a loan that the pros were actually given tools and equipment. So we were able to lend in total 129 pros. So these are some of the loan features. So one of the features was the repayment method was going to be 12 months, that's an year. So we started with the first group in January in 2019. So their first year was ending in February 2020. So the repayment was going to be 15% share of their labor earnings. So that meant every time they worked onto the platform, whatever income that they were going to earn, 15% was going to go to repay their loan. The loan fee for the entire 12 months was 10%. So some of the insights and recommendations that came out, we had two, so direct benefits and indirect benefits. For the direct benefits, we saw there was ability and availability to do more work. So the pros, especially who bought tools and equipment, they reported that they were able to do more work compared to before when they didn't have these tools, because majority of them were sharing tools. Some of them even would get opportunity to work onto the platform, but they were not able to go and do the work because they did not have the tool and they had to wait onto other people to be able to give them the tools. So the other benefit, it was the immediate utility. So the benefit was outrightly. So it did not have to wait for a long time for them to be able to realize that. The other thing is most of them not only work on the platform, but sometimes they work offline, meaning that they can do their other work when they don't get job matches on the platform. So they think also this, in a way, contributed to them being able to generate more income. It was reported. So the second set of indirect benefits that they said, they generally appreciated about the loan. And this is because of the competitive rate and also the simplicity in the way they were able to apply. So most of them who had previously experienced even trying to go and access some of the loan products into formal financial institutions, they said there was a bureaucratic way whereby they were required to fill a lot of paperwork, and then there were so many hidden charges. So for this particular loan, the transparency was there. They knew the terms and conditions that they were getting themselves into. So the same way some of them said, like they were able to choose their income, whereby when they got this loan, however much they did not buy the tools immediately, but it enabled them maybe purchase like raw materials, which enabled them to fetch higher profit margin. So again, this is something that came out from all of them, especially when we continuously did the qualitative interviews. So they kept on saying they wanted to make sure that they repay their loan in good time so that they can be able to be eligible for another loan with a higher we had over and over is like most of them were also using the digital credit, which is quite vast here in Kenya. So they knew immediately you keep a very good credit score, you are eligible to get higher loans, and also like to continue getting loans. So this is just one example of some of the things that we were able to earlier on learn as the loan pilot was ongoing. As I mentioned before, there are two loan types, but we also had our own, concerns along the way, whereby the pros kept on saying that they were doing more of the work also outside the platform. But Lynk, together with BFA and our funders DDG, we had provided a pay bill number to them to enable them not only to rely on the work that they get on the platform to repay their loans, but also they could be able to repay their loans using the pay bill number. But during the whole time, when we were still doing this engagement, none of the pros had paid via the pay bill number. So that also showed us, maybe probably they thought if they were paying a lot from the outside work they were getting, maybe the platform, Lynk as a platform, would not be able to give them more work. That is just a hypothesis, but it's something that we are not able to prove. But all in all, I think what we ended up hearing, it is like, indeed, they were able to increase their productivity and also their income. So as we ended our pilot, these are some of the recommendations that, we left with Lynk. For example, for starter pack, we said probably these loans should continue because starter pack itself had a high repayment rate of 96%. So throughout the whole time, we did not see any defaults, and we are saying we did not see any defaults because of the loan term. We said the repayment term was going to be 12 months. So we did not finish up, our program ended before we were able to finish up. So we did not have defaults as to when we ended this project with Lynk. So our recommendation was continue with the starter pack because most people are repaying very well and it was a bit short term. Maybe expand the starter pack loan to offer larger loan ticket size, not just like an entry pack into profession. So on the unrestricted loan, I think one of our recommendations was for them to restructure the eligibility criteria to address the level of engagement on the platform. Again, it was going to provide a career development pathway to enable just the pros to be able to grow further their careers. So also, another recommendation that we had, it's about the growth of loans. So to upscale some of the people that they had who are really doing one of their biggest projects, like carpenters, who would, have fit out workshops and train, they would look for other people to be able to plug in onto the Lynk platform. So I'll end there for now. Happy to take other questions. I'll welcome my colleague, Edward, to also share with us more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was insightful. Before I welcome Edward to take the stage, I just want to remind you that you can drop your questions on the questions section. If there's some that the presenter can answer as we move along, we'll do that. So feel free to drop any questions or any issues that you might be experiencing. Now, our next presenter is Edward Obiko. He's a senior manager for digital financial services at MSC. And he will take us through the journey of how MSC developed insurance and microinsurance product concepts for informal workers. Welcome, Edward.
Thank you, Doreen. So MSC worked with Lynk, which is a gig platform that employs informal workers. And we sort of came onto this project and discovered there's a lot of work that's being done by gig workers and these platforms for which there's not formal financial services, or the formal financial services are not actually a good fit. So we looked at what kind of insurance and microinsurance products, product concepts really, that are there for informal workers. And why we separated this is because both the insurance platforms and the gig workers did need some sort of different kind of insurance. And we'll just explore and share with you what work we did and how far we've reached with this exploration. So on the agenda, we have what we'll talk about as being the background of the project. We'll also talk about what kind of innovation in microinsurance exists for gig platform companies and what can be looked at going forward. And I'll also look at how we did develop the insurance product concepts for Lynk, its workers, and finally, to talk about the product concepts that we've developed and what is the way forward. So as a background to the project, we'll just talk about how we began this. The first point was us looking at how does DFS directly facilitate youth livelihoods. So we were actually looking at how DFS through direct employment and through agents and through all these sorts of financial service providers was actually enabling youth livelihoods. And as we were looking at this, we found out that a lot of what DFS is doing is enabling the digital economy further beyond directly creating employment. But with this is that it was enabling the digital economy for which there was a lack of financial services. So even the digital financial services that existed did not serve the informal youth economy very well. So this meant that we started looking at what insights are we seeing from the gig economy and what are the constraints really. So first thing we noted was that as it has been reported, was that 11% of youth in Kenya are unemployed, but even from the ones who are employed, 83% constitute the informal sector. This means that there's part-time and on-demand jobs. So these jobs are not predictable. These jobs just appear when the customers really have that need for a service to be fulfilled. And next, we also saw that a lot of the contractual structures of these jobs are really not commonplace. So it's very hard to give someone a financial service whereby they do not have a contract that actually really shows when they are supposed to expect a payment or what kind of benefits should they get. So lastly, we also looked at the gig platforms. For example, Lynk, which is a platform whereby it's actually called LinkedIn for the linked out. This means that a lot of people, for example, informal workers who are not able to get jobs through the formal means, do not really have a way in which they can show that even if they're hired, for example, for a wholesale gig, and by wholesale gig we mean a job that a construction company perhaps needs, and then this gig platform is able to offer 100 workers. Even in this kind of arrangement, the gig company itself needs to have some insurance, and the gig workers also need to have some sort of insurance to protect them from whatever risk they face. So with that, we had a methodology to be able to try and create this microinsurance concepts, and we used a human-centered design approach in MicroSave, now called MSC. We call it MI for ID. So we first of all started to understand what are the needs of Lynk and what are the needs of the Lynk Pros. So these are the workers. And next, we started creating microinsurance product concepts. This is in collaboration with the Lynk workers, as well as Lynk, the company itself, and lastly, the companies that offer microinsurance. Lastly, we just also looked at what are the kind of partnership models that would work. How do we select these models? And I mean, what's the best way to figure out what would work best for the workers, for the customers, and for the company. So before going deeper into this, I think one thing that we should note and is really worth talking about is the impact of COVID-19 and the gig economy. As we were concluding this research, that's when a lot of these restrictions began coming up. And as we spoke to a number of the workers we worked with, we realized that, for example, for Uber drivers, business has dropped to less than a quarter. So meaning one driver can just has to settle for about a single ride or less in a day. A lot of the gig workers are doing work that requires physical proximity to their customers. which means that, yes, most customers are not now taking this work. One thing we noticed was that a lot of gig workers were also getting a boom in work in that delivery services, for example, Global, which operates in Nairobi, had seen a bit bigger boom. But ironically, a lot of these workers also thought that this was quite high risk and that they're putting themselves and their community in danger, which just went to show that how much relevant our work was and how much it will be going forward, given that a lot of these things that we take for granted, like benefits and covers to cover health and, for example, loss of work if you're not fruitfully or if you're not productively employed in a permanent job, some of these things are really ignored for this new sector, which we call the gig platforms. So for that, we did look at what kind of innovation is happening in microinsurance and the gig economy. Looking at insurance, the first thing that we were able to observe was that a lot of the traditional models used a push kind of approach to be able to sell products. So they'd identify all of these categories of workers, which were traditionally pooled and had the same characteristics, but a lot more of kind of a pool model began emerging once a lot of the companies, traditional insurance companies, started noticing that they could actually customize the products to be able to fit a non-conventional kind of work. But with the gig platforms, we are seeing that what is actually needed is a lot more spontaneous and dynamic kind of models, which the first of which we saw was pay-as-you-go models. And a lot of data actually exists to be able to justify and to be able to make a business case for this kind of insurance. So with that, we started looking at what are the risks and to be able to build a business case. What are the risks that are being faced by these gig workers? So the Lynk Pros and Lynk, the company itself, we saw that a lot of the workers faced work-related injuries and accidents. They had medical costs sometimes to take care of. There was loss of revenue if, for example, they had some injuries made them not be able to attend work. There was out-of-pocket costs. So if work was not satisfactory to the customers, it meant that they had to do work, and sometimes they had to pay for this work. And lastly, they also had sometimes destruction or damage to their own tools, and sometimes even loss of their tools. So for the gig platform companies, in this example, Lynk, they faced a lot of reputational and financial risk. They did see sometimes loss of revenue in terms of paid back guarantees. So sometimes they guarantee the work and they have to pay back these guarantees to customers who are not satisfied. Sometimes they'll have legal suits following off of dissatisfaction again from the customers. And sometimes there would also be third-party injuries caused by the actions of the pros. So this would mean, for example, if someone is working on something and an accident happens and it actually affects someone who's not even involved, passerby or someone who's a stranger to this, Lynk will have to take care of that. So quite a few risks, which both for the company and for the individuals working on these jobs were not taken care of, and the industry did not provide any kind of solutions that would benefit them. But something else that we also saw was that a lot of these gigs, if we could call them so, did not really fall into the traditional categories of jobs which insurance companies covered, but it did actually fit very well into what could be captured by the data in terms of, for example, the categories of jobs which they did. There was beauty and healthcare. There was home care. This means sometimes just cleaning people's houses, sometimes also just maintaining furniture, doing installations and maintenance. And we saw that for these different categories, there was different risk profiles, meaning that these risk profiles could actually be used to develop insurance products or microinsurance products that would be quite beneficial to the workers who are dealing with it. So in beauty and health, we can see that sometimes it would be things to do with infections and dealing with certain products. For home care, we'd see that sometimes breakages in clients' property, injuries such as burns and cuts when working with customers. In furniture and fittings, we see injuries from tools and machines, loss of or damage of tools and their own machines, and lastly, in installation and maintenance, which was the fourth category which Lynk worked with, whereby we saw damage to clients' property as well as client dissatisfaction. So as seen at the bottom of the screen, we can see that those categories which had the least likelihood of the risks occurring, and categories which had a higher likelihood of these risks occurring. So this means that we were able to also talk to the workers, pros, and also find out from them what do they perceive of this risk and what was their ability or willingness to pay for insurance services, which they would typically not call insurance. So, I mean, one of the things we noticed was that they really understand the various exposure to the risks that they are exposed to, and that they did do a lot to take the self-precaution to mitigate against any eventualities, but they also saw that a lot of their needs were not really packaged in the same way, in the traditional ways we talk about financial services. But yes, a lot of these other financial services and products, such as education policies and pension products, look like something they saw as risks, and they saw that they needed to be able to protect their family and themselves against. So this was actually sort of showing that they needed these products and services to be bundled and to be offered in a way in which they were able to consume them without really noticing too much difference in their financial and lifestyles. So as we went ahead, we developed the product concepts, and we looked at what concepts can work for Lynk, for the Lynk Pros. First of all, looking at personal accidents at work, the bundled coverages. We looked at what can help their loss of income, what kind of covers should be complemented, because some of them already have got, for example, National Hospital Insurance Fund coverage, which they think that should be put together with whatever products or services that will be offered to them. They also talked about professional indemnity. Let's put a caveat, they did not put it into these terms, but yes, they did talk about sometimes that the client dissatisfaction and would be something that would be of worry to them because it happens quite a bit. But yes, also them talking about income smoothening for regular expenses such as school fees. So this was actually quite a big, I mean, almost a daunting task to be able to fulfill. But with that, we saw complements or complementary products and how this can be offered to them by also looking at how the gig platforms can contribute to this. So the gig platforms sometimes needed covers, for example, an all risk cover in quotes, meaning that cover that could take care of all the workers that are working on a certain project. For example, Lynk has been working on construction projects, and also just the perspective of sometimes these companies wanting to really take responsibility of the welfare of their customers. So social responsibility looked like something that would be beneficial for the gig workers and also for the customers, who some of whom said they'd be happy to get some workers who at least they know for these workers are workers who are actually working with the benefits that you and I perhaps as employed or people with traditional work are benefiting from. So the product concepts that we developed eventually were products that were at least had 3 tags or 3 kind of principles that we followed. So first being on demand, next being pseudonymous, so that means pseudo-anonymous, and lastly being prepaid insurance. So I'll take you through how these three principles worked for us. So the first one being on-demand and dynamic. This meant that we identified the short-term insurance needs for Lynk, and noted that the personal accident coverage for active workers on a day-to-day basis was something that they needed. So this means that out of 1,000 workers, on any given day, Lynk has only perhaps about 400 active professionals, meaning out of their 1,000 workers, not all 1,000 are working at any day that's considered. This means that instead of covering all their 1,000 workers on a daily basis, this means for a 30-day period, it means that only 400 workers need to be covered on a daily basis, meaning that the workers' premiums can be calculated based on the frequency of their work and also on the risk profile they faced. So we talked about the four different categories that of workers that there were, meaning that giving individual risk profiles and also looking at the frequency of their work, you're able to tell how much at risk is this person of getting an accident or needing to have an insurance cover. Next was that we also looked at it being pseudo-anonymous. This means that we designed an insurance cover that means there's 400 active professionals, but these do not need to be identified or particular 400 workers, meaning any 400 workers could be covered for that particular day. If, for example, the platform had a few more workers than 400 or less than 400, they would on a daily basis report back to the insurance company how many people were working. Then they'd be able to calculate what's the risk profile and what's the kind of premium that needs to be paid. So looking retrospectively means that we already have the data of how many workers are being covered, but going forward, it means that we're able to also predict on any given period how many workers are going to be covered for the next few months. And now this is a dynamic kind of arrangement that Lynk now has with the microinsurance provider. And lastly, also ensuring that this was prepaid, just for the goodwill and showing that Lynk is already in a contract with the microinsurance company. They prepaid these premiums for the average number of workers that were expected. So this means that because they'd already prepaid this amount, all they need to do is that once the worker is being remunerated for the work that they've done, they'd have a deduction. So for example, if a worker deserves to pay a premium of 250 shillings, which is about $2.5, this amount will be spread over the number of gigs that he's expected to do over the year. So if he's supposed to pay 250 and he's expected to do about 25 gigs, this will be divided and the premium that he'll pay for every gig based on when the gig is done is 10 shillings per gig. So this meant that a lot of the gig workers were already confident or are okay with actually paying these premiums because they looked like very minimal and actually below what they thought would be the payment that they have to make after every gig. So the key takeaways for this project was that it was important to look at how microinsurance can be made mandatory but also voluntary, in that you can have opt-in products that can be added onto the products that came first to mind. So these being the education policies, for example, that they thought should be something that should ride with traditional products that are being offered. But also in it being mandatory, this also meant that yes, the gig platforms, for example, needed to have WIBA, which is work injury benefits insurance. This is a requirement by law. So it meant that for the gig workers, at least the ones who were being introduced to the product immediately, they had to take this as a mandatory deduction on their work. But also that identification and onboarding of more insurance partners was something that's quite critical. We worked with one insurance partner for this pilot, who was Britam, and we really appreciate their support and contribution to this project. But yes, a lot of insurance partners were not necessarily ready or let's say predisposed to how differently data is actually enabling insurance companies to be able to design and actually create appropriate products for workers on the gig platforms who've got who have all of the information that is required to be able to give similar services as employed people. But also, lastly, that experiential learning methods were quite critical in that a lot of these were experiments, and it also leads us to not think about financial products as and the financial education really as something that you do at one time or in a classroom setting, but really to be able to disseminate such kind of information in their normal working situations through videos, through digital platforms, which they are already familiar with, such as WhatsApp. And yes, so we are actually in the stage whereby we did begin this pilot. The COVID-19 restrictions have got quite a bit of an effect on what we think would be the way it would traditionally work, but we still think that a lot of work needs to be done in this area, and we welcome your opinions and questions to be able to contribute to this project and these kinds of concepts to really create youth employment and further it through digital platforms. That's it for my presentation. I think we'll welcome a few more questions and clarifications and contributions really for this project.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was quite insightful. I hope we've all gained some insight from there, which we really have. I've seen a few questions coming in. I want to bring the presentation part of the webinar to an end so that we can have a small section where we can have the Q&A. We have some questions in the chat box. I will start off by just picking up the first ones that came in. But before I do that, let me just request that you give us some feedback. I'm going to launch the poll facility. Basically, we really appreciate any feedback that you give us on the webinar based on the flow and even the materials that we presented, so that we can better prepare, or we can even give more webinars that are maybe in the topics that you'd want to hear of in the future. So as we go on with the Q&A session, kindly just take a few minutes to answer the poll questions. Now, one question stroke comment that has come in, maybe this is to you, Ed. I'll just read it out so that you can just respond to this. One of the things that has come out is that there's a comment here: while there are business cases for COVID gig workers, a lot of lenders are not flexible as MSC or BFA. So particularly in light of COVID-19 and additional measures, lenders are even more conservative and unwilling to provide services to gig workers. So what are some of the policies or mechanisms financial institutions need to re-explore to support these groups? I would possibly give that to Ed. And maybe with examples, yes.
Yes, so I would say that perhaps lenders are becoming a lot less flexible, not only for informal workers, and this hits informal workers a lot harder, but even for formal workers, in that there's a lot less capacity for people to pay. And for gig workers and a lot of workers on these platforms, one thing that has been at least beneficial to them with regard to being able to prove sources of income and at least a history of the income is that a lot of this now has a digital footprint. So, for example, every time you do take an Uber, there's an amount that you pay to them, and there's a commission that they earn, and all of this is recorded, and it's actually recorded without the gig worker really making any effort to do this. So it means that they're more able to show that this is my digital footprint, this is how much I can be able to earn. And even with, for example, the COVID-19 crisis, for some people, they've been able to make a lot more to be able to show a lot of their worth. I mean, what we call essential workers in this period, we're really noticing that who can we not work without. So yes, the digital footprint is a good thing, and it means that they are able to actually really prove how much they can be worth and how much the potential they have which is what we were talking about when talking about the insurance product. So for the insurance product, it was also that previously they were not able to show, for example, a taxi driver who was not on Uber or Taxify was not able to show their records very well. Right now, they're able to do that just because they can download a printout from their employer of how much they've been earning. So it can be both a good thing and a bad thing, but the main point here being that there's a digital footprint, and this can help them to be able to show what the paying capacity is to financial service providers. I think perhaps maybe with regard to lending, we can also have an opinion from Anne, for whom BFA actually did this work directly touching on credit.
Thank you, Ed. Before we move to Anne, there's maybe a question that you can also address. Kevin is asking how regularly were the pros were able to land these jobs on the platform, on the Lynk platform.
Yes, so a lot of workers actually did report receiving more gigs once they got onto the platforms. So, for example, a furniture worker on the side of the street would regularly depend on just people walking by and looking at their work and making orders. So some of them also do have, for example, posters just showing this is my number in case you want to get something like this. But once they got onto the gig platforms, they did record a lot of quite a bit of increase in the work they got through the platform. And I mean, definitely this did lead to also them starting to take stock of it is important for them to actually keep the records, and that for them having records, it was a very good thing, beneficial in financial terms, in that they were able to prove this is how much I'm worth, and this is how much I can actually generate in any given period.
Thank you, Ed. Anne, this is a question to you. They're asking, Kevin is asking, could you please explain a little bit more about the pay bill number, the one you talked about when you were developing the product? He didn't quite catch that. Thank you, Anne. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Julie. So on the pay bill number, I think maybe Kevin does not know, but pay bill number is just like a merchant bill. So what happens is, like, when you're working on a platform like Lynk, it does not necessarily mean that all through and through you will be having job on the platform. So they have different categories of different people who work on the platform, like the beauty category, they're carpenters, they're electricians. So sometimes when they're outside platform, they can still continue to do their job. So when we were doing our qualitative interviews throughout the whole entire pilot period, some of them would mention that indeed now, because they both, like those sector-specific tools, they are able to do a lot of work even outside the Lynk platform. So the pay bill number was to enable them not only to rely on the income that they get on the Lynk platform to be able to repay their loan. So we were also, like, in a way, like encouraging them, whenever they do work outside the platform, they can equally be able to repay their loan, so that also it does not, become a pain at some point when maybe, they are not getting more frequent jobs onto the platform. But throughout the period that we did the pilot with Lynk, like none of the pros has used the pay bill to repay the loan.
Right. Thank you, Anne. I'll throw this question. It is being asked that it's very interesting views on insurance from interactions with traditional insurance firms. What they're asking is, what are their views on insurance for gig for the traditional firms? Maybe Ed, you can take that.
Yeah, we can take this. So yes, just like traditional financial service providers, a lot of them tend to create products for which they would expect their customers to fit their own lifestyles into. So I mean, a good example of this is what we normally say, for example, at MSC Microsoft, we create market-led products. This means that the products are actually not created by the financial service providers, but rather we do try to adapt our own products to be able to fit the lifestyles of our customers. So this typically means that, for example, someone who does not get a salary at the end of the month or a regular salary at the end of the month, why would you create for them a product for which they need to pay a premium at the end of the month? So this means that instead of actually the financial service providers creating products and expecting their customers to adapt their own income around when these providers actually create the services, it should happen the other way around. The financial providers need to start looking at what are our customers' needs. I mean, how do they, for example, get money? How do they spend their money? How do they want to protect the money, and what are their aspirations? Then it means that now a lot of traditional companies need to begin delivering products which are actually suitable to the clients' lifestyles. So that's what we got. I mean, we spoke to, I mean, we worked on this project with Britain, who are very, very gracious in being able to create something that fitted our customers' lifestyle. But a lot of the traditional companies we talked to did not yet develop that kind of working approach. And we think this is something that needs to really change in the industry. We're seeing this happen in some locations in developing countries and also in developed countries, but a lot more of that needs to be done here.
Thank you, Ed, for that. A question comes through. Per a scoping exercise that CGAP recently conducted in Nairobi, many platforms are reluctant to offer value-added services for workers, especially those that require a payroll deduction, because this may blur the legal line between employees and contractors. Can you please comment on this? Maybe Anne, you can take this on.
I'll say it's something that we did not actually research about, so we cannot be able to speak about that. But I would say generally also like it's a platform, so it's just like a piece that is enabling, especially this kind of skilled informal workers, to be able to get into formal platform. These are people who have not been paying, for example, let's say their taxes. So if you start telling them to start paying their taxes, then there's a problem. But if they are able to be, in a way, being introduced slowly into the formal sector, then eventually I don't think they'll have a problem. But I think a platform being a platform, we are headed in terms of trying, to bring all the regulations in place. But still, I think it's work in progress.
All right, thank you. You also mentioned that pros showed an inclination about savings. That's another question. So what are some of your thoughts on the appetite for DFS savings instruments by those on Lynk? Either Anne or Ed, you can take this one.
I think I'll take that.
Yeah.
So what we had overall, when we're doing the qualitative interviews with the pros, it's like for those who are able to get the tools, like what I mentioned about the starter pack, they saw actually an increment in terms of their income, though it's not, a huge margin, but they were able to repay their loans and also to keep some money. And some of the products they mentioned how they're able to save their money was through the bond. I think most Kenyans, they have a better and they have insurance. So those are the pockets that we had people were saving. So I don't think there's anyone who mentioned particularly taking money to the bank when we were doing this pilot, but most of them will say whatever I'm left with, I maybe save it to my M-Shwari account, because they considered M-Shwari as a faraway place whereby they cannot be able to touch that money. Then basically these are people who would require oftenly to be able to buy their raw materials. For example, for the beauticians, some of them would want to buy cotton wool or even nail polish for their work. So they saw also those pockets as an easier way in terms of accessing their money rather than them taking into, for example, a bank. I don't know if Ed wants to add something to that.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the typical misconceptions that there is in a lot of financial services in the industry is that a lot of the informal workers, or I mean, sometimes even you and I, do not consider these products in the same categories as we typically use. I mean, the same nomenclature. For example, savings. A lot of people will not use the word savings when literally what they are actually doing is looking for a way to save. So as when we said, for example, the gig workers would like to sometimes have protection for education in case they're not able to pay the school fees on term 1 or term 2, term 3, because their work does not come in that cycle. So they want a way to be able to pay for this. They want to be able to protect their money to be able to handle these kinds of regular requirements, again, but still maintaining their irregular income. So even if they have these aspirations of savings and being able to make these regular payments, they will not refer to the services they want as savings. So even for the financial service providers, when creating these products and when disseminating these to this kind of population, they really need to nuance the kind of benefits rather than whatever names they give to these products, such as savings.
All right. Thank you, Ed. I think we have time for just one more question, and then after that, we have seen all the questions that have come into the chat box. We will be following up on email directly to the participants who've asked the question. So in case yours doesn't get answered in the session, not to worry, there'll be a follow-up for this. Just one more question that I can pose. So it's asked that how do you draw parallels between countries which are more hard hit by the pandemic and Lynk's Kenya platform? Someone is saying the time to resume back to normalcy will take more time, and thus the microinsurance company will be very worried. I don't know if, Ed, you can speak to that. Largely asking about how they draw parallels between the countries which are more hard hit by the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite relative, but I mean, something we mentioned at least towards the end of the second part of the presentation was that a lot of what we thought needed to be done on site, or this proximity kind of services where it needed a physical presence, we are really beginning to notice that a lot of work can actually be done remotely. We can really take care of a lot of our requirements and services that we require through digital means or through the assistance of digital means, meaning that there's a lot more we can do with what is already existing. Sometimes, I mean, it's said that the COVID impact, I mean, COVID-19 crisis has opened up our eyes to what we were not, we were not really by default just taking advantage of. So sometimes for a lot of people who sometimes had physical locations for where they needed to pay rent and they needed to do just the typical things which they could do from their own locations, actually, we are realizing that a lot of these are not really necessary, and a lot can be done within the digital economy. A lot of people have benefited from this, and we think, yes, much rather than us looking at how much it has negatively impacted, there's also a lot of opportunity in how much we are actually realizing this digital economy, which sometimes we think there's a really big digital divide between, for example, middle income and low income, but there isn't really that big of a divide. So we think both sides of the coin, there's advantages and disadvantages, but going into the future, we see that the digital economies and we see ways to actually really leapfrog a lot of what were the barriers to being able to offer financial services to low-income people.
Thank you for that. With that, I'd like to bring this webinar to a close. Many thanks to all the participants. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you to Edward. Thank you to Anne for preparing. And basically, thank you for having made the time. So allow me to bring the presentation to an end. A lot of you have asked whether this will be made available. Yes, in the form of a recording. We will have this uploaded on our website by tomorrow. So kindly just visit our MSC website and we'll have this recording available to you. Thank you very much.